spaces are very crowded, right? Especially at Help Scout. We had, or help desk software, there's 300-ish companies all competing in that same category. And so it's not just a matter of can you get the right value prop and the right messaging, because everyone, for the most part, can do that. A great copywriter, in my experience working with them, they ask so many questions, right? Like they're learners first. When you start moving fast and you're not aligned on that, you end up with this like Frankenstein of a marketing experience where the website says one thing, I come in, I get an email that says something else. I talk to sales, they're pitching me on a different value, and it's this completely disjointed experience where it feels like I'm dealing with 3 different companies. And I think that really goes back to that not aligning around those 3 things.
Hey, welcome to the Message Market Fit podcast. I'm your host, Chris Silvestri, and if you're new here, this is a show where I chat with B2B SaaS folks in marketing, product, growth, and founders about how they join the conversation already happening in their customers' minds. We dive deep into their thinking, their systems, and their playbooks to see how they empathize with their audience and speak to them in a way that resonates, so they're compelled to take action. Join us and learn how you too can shape your messaging strategy and write copy that truly resonates and differentiates you. I'm super excited about my guest today, Adam Goyette. Adam is the founder at Growth Union, a marketing agency helping B2B SaaS companies scale fast and efficiently. In this episode, we chat about Adam's experience leading growth marketing at high-growth SaaS companies, his passion for building results-oriented teams, and his insights on developing effective digital, social, and content marketing strategies that drive customer engagement, lead generation, and revenue growth. Let's dive right in. Hey, Adam, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the podcast. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you doing? Thanks for having me.
Great. Cool, so let's jump right in. I know some of your past experience, so you worked at pretty big companies like Help Scout and G2. What are the, top 3 lessons that you've learned working at those companies about marketing and especially about messaging and understanding customers?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would say I learned is spaces are very crowded, right? Especially at Help Scout. We had, or help desk software, there's 300-ish companies all competing in that same category. And so it's not just a matter of can you get the right value prop and the right messaging, because everyone, for the most part, can do that. And so how is that then different than the other 300 companies who say, we help you service customers better, we help you do X, Y, and Z, whatever it is, right? So that's not enough. And so I think one of the big lessons there is you have to then figure out how do you do it differently? How do you have a unique take on something that you're going to be doing? So I would say that would be one of the biggest lessons. I think the other big lesson probably from my time at G2 is understanding your buyer very intimately is like a huge competitive advantage. And what I mean by that is it's not just, I know we sell to customer service people or we sell to marketers, but at G2, that was the first time like I was marketing to myself, right? I was the buyer at most of these other companies as a demand gen person. And so it became almost like super easy for me to understand like, this is what will motivate them. This is how this person's going to think about this. And this is what like is actually the real trigger point in this campaign. Here's the offer that would get them excited. And so understanding like your buyer and really understanding that persona really well beyond just the surface level, like here's our persona, it's this person, here's what they care about. And so I think that really illuminated like what a competitive advantage that is when you know that. And so I would say like those are 2. And then I think the third one, which is probably near and dear to your heart as a conversion copywriter, is having a good conversion copywriter is such a cheat code when it comes to growth. And I never really worked with someone who was just strictly like, that was their area of expertise. And Eddie Schlaner was our copywriter at G2 and he's amazing. And it was such a lift on a lot of our campaigns because he was able to take a lot of the stuff we were trying to do and really amplify it in a much better way, make it way more compelling and taking really unique angles on things. And so I would say like from a messaging position, those are like the 3 big lessons I got out of those 2 companies.
Nice. Awesome. Yeah, my next question was actually about working with Eddie. So because I did some research, and one thing that I loved that he said about you was that you developed this ability to read markets and understand where things are going and how customers behave. So I was wondering, how was that collaboration like between you and Eddie? How do you think about working with and supervising a copywriter?
Yeah, I would say like Eddie's incredibly talented. Where I was trying to help guide Eddie isn't copy. Like he's always will be a better copywriter than me. So I think when people manage anyone, designers or whatever, copywriters, creative people, their expertise is their expertise, right? And you're as a marketing leader, you're very rarely going to be better than any individual on your team. And if you are, you're probably not doing a good job hiring, right? Because if you think about it, like the designer we
Yeah.
hire should be way better than me who can stitch together things, or the copywriter we hire should be better than me, and the growth person should be better than me. And what I try to do is help paint the overall picture of things. Of here's why we're doing this campaign. Here's what we think we're going to be doing. And I think when Eddie says stuff like I'm good at reading markets and stuff like that, is a big way I look at campaigns or anything is very much from the buyer perspective. Okay, if I got this email, would I find this compelling? Would I actually open this email? Would I click on this? Is this an offer that's actually interesting to me? Or is this kind of what everyone else is doing? And it's amazing to me in my role now working with lots of companies. Companies just put together campaigns and check the box type of campaigns where it's done. We put together the email, we sent it, and then you look at it and there's very little thought that went into what actually went into the email to think, is this going to be compelling, or into the ad copy or into the landing page experience. And so I'm very critical of those kinds of experiences and making sure you're looking at it from the end user perspective. Because when you look, especially back to point one, which was how crowded things are, you're one of 300 companies that are possibly sending them an email that day, inviting them to a webinar. So what's the unique angle that you're taking outside of you can learn X? So I think like very critical in terms of, hey, how do we push this a little bit further to make it more unique?
Yeah. Yeah, it's super interesting. That's one of the things that I find it's very important to me as a copywriter, but also for my clients, right? Putting myself in the customer's shoes, like walking through the experience that they walk through. Why do you think a lot of marketers don't do that enough or don't do that at all?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of reasons. I think the number one thing is probably the bandwidth. I think it's like a lot of marketers, especially today, it's do more with less type of approach. And so they're just trying to check the box, move on to the next thing, check the box, move on to the next thing. And what I think they miss out on is if you had taken the time, even though it might take you an extra hour to brainstorm and pause before you start creating, the impact of that probably would have been a lot bigger. And even though it might take longer, the end result of what you're trying to do is not how many things you're getting done. The end result of success as a marketer is like, are you actually impacting revenue? And I think a lot of times people are just viewing their job as almost like factory, like I need to just produce stuff. And I think people have confused the concept that you need to go fast in a startup with that you need to go fast, but that doesn't mean you forget about quality and you forget about looking at the experiences you're providing. Because I think in a lot of ways, when you do that, you end up with campaigns that are half-assed and they don't perform great. And it's really truly hard to measure as a growth person. Is it the channel? Was it the campaign? Was it the execution? What didn't work here? And you don't set campaigns up for success when you do those kinds of things.
Yeah. You mentioned bandwidth, and especially nowadays, I find with a lot of the tools that come out, and especially AI, right? A lot of marketers might think, okay, I got this ChatGPT Claude thing to write some copy. What would you say to a marketer who's considering using AI rather than hiring a copywriter or working with a copywriter?
Yeah, I don't think you can have AI do your copy and do it compelling. Because to me, again, I think one of the biggest things is you have to really have a unique angle and be able to stand out in what you're doing. And so if you're running the same prompts that everyone else is, it's a race to the bottom. It's a little bit like the content creation. If everyone can create this content, what's unique about it? There's nothing unique about it, right? And so for me, I think there's tons of use cases for AI. Writing copy on a website, I don't feel like is one of them. I think like maybe if you have unique data and you can give it and summarize this data into a blog post and it's all based off of the unique data you're feeding it. Okay, cool. That's a good use case for a blog or for content that you could use. Using it to write the copy for our homepage, I don't think is that right. It's because I just think you're gonna put very generic, watered down type of content that's just not going to convert. It's going to look exactly the same as all the other companies out there in your space.
Yeah. Speaking of this, you had something that I liked. on LinkedIn you wrote only bad marketing is at risk with AI. What do you mean by that and by bad marketing?
Yeah, I think the idea that AI is going to replace content or AI is going to replace whatever it might be, and it replaces a base level thing. If that's all you're doing, if all you're writing is super generic listicles type of content where it's top 10 reasons, whatever you need X, if that's the type of content you're producing, it's low value content. So yeah, can AI replace that? 100%. Can AI replace a podcast like this where you're having a conversation? No. Can AI replace your own insights into copywriting and your experience of working with clients and writing insightful posts about here's what I've seen work and what not work? No. Can I do a generic, here's 10 things you need to be worried about for copywriting, or here's 10 tactics? Like, yes, it can replace that sort of stuff. And so to me, that was never good marketing. That was people playing the game of SEO or playing the game of whatever it might be. And so for me, I think, yeah, that stuff can be replaced. And if you're a good marketer, you're excited about the potential of, yeah, I don't have to waste my time doing these types of articles or waste the team's time. I want the team focused on high value impact stuff and not doing these kind of like low value type of materials. And so when I say like it's replacing bad marketing, that's what I mean.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah. I'm curious, you having worked with someone like Eddie or having worked on messaging yourself, what would you say makes a great copywriter?
Like I can't tell you in terms of the process of writing or like how they write. I would say a great copywriter, in my experience working with them, they ask so many questions, right? Like they're learners first. They don't come in presumptive, here's what we're doing. Like the amount of questions I feel like I would get asked from Eddie of like, why are we doing this? Or like the question of why, I feel like Eddie asked a ton. Or like, why is this the angle? Why do they care about this? Why is this the thing? And then he would go off and come back with something and you'd be like, oh, wow, this is amazing. And I think the inquisitive kind of nature of someone to really understand the problem, because back to one of the things I learned, you have to really understand the buyer. And I think Eddie would spend a lot of time, or any great copywriter will spend a lot of time really trying to understand. And it's not a generic approach to it. At least that's my experience. You've been doing it. What do you think are the biggest things from your end?
Yeah, no, I think for sure, like speaking for myself, I know that having worked with different clients, I'm not in-house copywriter, so working with a lot of clients especially, the more I dive into different businesses, different products, the more I think I don't know anything because everything's so different. People make decisions so differently and think so differently, which is builds this like innate imposter syndrome inside of myself that always makes me want to ask more and more questions to clarify things, even before I write any word at all.
Yeah, I think the worst thing is if you think you know the buyer so well, because I think a lot of times marketing speak comes out and it's like buzzwords, acronyms, all this sort of stuff. And you see it on almost every homepage you go to where it's, we're the leading solution to help drive more revenue. And you're just like, what do you actually do? And I think that's one of the, like my smell tests. Does this company have a good copywriter or good marketing or not? Can I go to your website and actually understand what it is you do?
Yeah.
Because a lot of times I read the headlines and I'm like, okay, I get the high level concept, but I have no idea what does your product actually do. And to me, I think that's a big miss in a lot of spots.
The 5-second test. Super helpful.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. So yeah, let's work through the process. So before actually writing any word, there's a lot of stuff that comes before. And there are a lot of companies that think about like growth tactics and start like tinkering with stuff. But before that, there's positioning and messaging strategy. So how do you think about those?
To me, I think before you ever get to growth tactics, a lot of times you have to spend, I think the three big areas I have companies focus in on when I work with them is, do we all agree who the persona is we're even going after? And I think that's really important. Who do we actually sell to? Because a lot of times it's actually not aligned across the company. And it's wild to see like marketing's like, oh, we sell to this level company. It's mostly like individuals. And then you talk to sales and they're like, we're trying to go mid-market to enterprise. And that's how we're going to grow this year. And there's just like a complete misalignment of who are we actually selling to. And I think identifying who that is a huge thing. So number one is, are we all aligned on who that is? And then the second piece is, are we aligned on how we talk about the product? And I don't mean like specific words necessarily, but what are the three big value pillars we offer as a company? What are our three differentiators? What are the other options in the market? And like, why do people choose us? Do we have that documented anywhere? Do we actually have like a messaging house framework that we can use as a resource to go back to say, here's how we think about the product. Here's how we think, here's what our unique differentiators are, all this sort of stuff. And then I think the third one, which doesn't get talked about a lot in that whole process, is also what is our growth model? Because before you can get to tactics and all these kinds of campaigns, I need to know like where are we trying to get to, right? If I'm at G2 or trying to 3x this year, okay, cool. The scale of which I need to think in terms of campaigns and where I'm going to place bets is very different than maybe a company that's just trying to grow 20% this year and is bootstrapped. Like the approach is very different. And I think aligning those three things first, then you can get into growth tactics to make sure we're all aligned in campaigns and all that sort of fun stuff. But it also makes it a lot easier to scale up faster because when you align those first three things, it's easy to start running campaigns because we're all going back to the same artifacts to say, okay, here's what's informing these decisions. Here's why we're actually taking this approach. When we run ads, we're going to touch on one of these three value props. We can play around with the copy and what that looks like, or like the offers within that, but it always ties back to those three things. I think getting those right helps a lot in terms of being able to go fast and align the teams around what we try to do. Also, it helps you a ton down the road because when you start moving fast and you're not aligned on that, you end up with this like Frankenstein of a marketing experience where the website says one thing, I inbound, I come in, I get an email that says something else. I talk to sales, they're pitching me on a different value prop. And then all the nurture emails are speaking about something else. And it's this completely disjointed experience where it feels like I'm dealing with three different companies. And we've all seen that happen in real life and felt that. You're like, man, this doesn't even feel like the same company, or sales calling. You're like, oh, this isn't what I thought at all that the product did. And I think that really goes back to that not aligning around those three things.
Yeah. How would you recommend companies align? Like, for example, as a marketer, how would you keep product sales and marketing aligned?
Yeah. Yeah, I think a big thing is aligning around those three things is get everyone in the room and actually like document what that looks like. And so as a marketer, you don't have to be the one with all the answers, but you should be the one facilitating those to say, okay, who is our persona? And if there is a dispute, like then I think it's having an honest conversation about who are we going after and why, and making sure that everyone's aligned around what that is. Because then I think it makes it very easy because when you get into the growth mode to say, okay, here's our growth plan for this year. We're going to grow 50%. Where do we expect that growth to come from? Is it upsells? Is it, if we are going after this persona, what gaps do we have in the product then? Because I think we can look at it and say, okay, here's where everyone else is selling. And so I think everyone needs to be involved in those discussions and just being very honest and transparent about where there are gaps. And it's not like a ego-driven thing where it's, oh man, we're missing these features. It needs to be like an attack on the product team. It just needs to be an honest conversation of like, here's where we actually have gaps. If we are truly going after enterprise or mid-market, here's what everyone else has. Here's what we have. And so sales will probably happily tell you where they're losing deals and why and where their gaps are. Because then you can say, if that's where we're growing this year, how does the product roadmap feed into that? If that's where we're growing this year, how does the marketing strategy align to that? If we're going up market and selling into the enterprise, and then the sales motion, how does that align to that? Because otherwise you end up where people are doing different things across different segments at different parts of the funnel. Products off building features that maybe nobody cares about, or maybe it's more focused on SMB versus the enterprise clients you're trying to get. And it just creates like this big mishmash. And so I think like you should be facilitating those conversations if you feel like there's misalignment or it's not clearly documented. If it is like everyone's aligned, then just document it and get everyone to sign off on, okay, here's what we're doing then. Because I think when you can all look at it through the same lens of here's where we're trying to grow and here's where our focus is, it makes everything a lot easier.
Yeah. I'm curious, how do you address conflicts? For example, let's say marketing comes up with some messaging that they based off of researching with customers. How do you sell it to other departments? Because sometimes they can have their own ideas, right? Which can be very strong. So how do you handle that?
Yep. Yeah, I would say like if the first time sales or product is hearing about any of the messaging or positioning is like what is being delivered, like here's the messaging, it's final, you did it wrong. I think they need to be part of the conversation earlier because marketing is one piece of the puzzle. And the reality is like what you say on a website and what actually hits on a phone call can be two very different things. And so sometimes I think marketing can just say, like, oh, we tested it and all this sort of stuff. And then they don't ask sales, what is sales actually saying on the phone? What is actually getting buyers excited? What is that getting them to convert? When we talk about this on a phone call, does it actually resonate? And sometimes you'll hear, no, not at all. Like they don't care about that. What they actually care about is that problem, but it's in this angle that they're looking at it, or it's this perspective that why they care about it. And so you could just be slightly off in terms of doing it. And so I think if you're building in a silo and then presenting to the rest of the company, like here's our messaging positioning, you've already missed step one, which is you should be collaborating with sales to get their feedback and input very early on, or saying, here's the trends we're seeing from sales calls and pulling that out. And from a product experience, here's how people are using the product. And we talk to 20 customers and here's what they're saying, and working with the product team to surface that insights. So I think that's the easiest way to get buy-in, is you start the process early with everyone involved in it.
Yeah, totally. Do you have any horror stories about companies maybe who focused on growth tactics rather than working on their positioning? Because that's a lot of times maybe I get a potential client reaching out and they say, oh, okay, let's write a copy. I want to launch like a new website redesign in a month. And obviously most of the times that's not enough. We need to go back to the research. So do you have any horror stories about like companies that actually, without naming names, obviously?
Yeah, I don't necessarily have one horror story where it's like, oh my God, I can't believe this. But I would say a general theme I see, which is like a horror story, is companies try to just quickly invest and they want to scale. And so they'll throw tons of money at paid search and they're like, we're going to do this. And they never took the time to do that alignment piece. And then you see it. And most of the times when I see it, I'm doing like an autopsy on the dead body because I'm coming in because they need help. It's okay. This is what we did. We decided we were going to spend $100,000 this quarter in paid spend, and we didn't see any results. And you're like, come in, and you're like, okay, let me dig in and understand like what kind of campaigns you were running, who were you targeting, and then you very quickly realize like the ads they're running are either super generic or they're talking about problems in very high level ways where I'm not really, if I saw this ad, I wouldn't really know what you guys did, or it's not compelling to me. Like, and I think like people tout like a free demo, like it's some amazing offer. And it's, oh, a free demo, where do I sign up? That's not a compelling offer to buyers out there. So I think it's people just assume I just turn on ads and people start coming in. And so you didn't take the time to actually make it compelling. You didn't take the time to make the copy compelling. You didn't take the time to understand, why does this buyer actually care? Why out of the 4,000 ads they're going to see that day is yours going to jump out to them? How are you targeting these people? Are you even targeting the right people? And so usually it's like just money flushed down the toilet type of effort because they didn't take the time to do some of that homework up front, which is really painful to see, to be honest, because especially early stage startups, you don't have that many chances to figure it out and get growth going. And you waste tons of revenue and time. And even worse, like you still don't have an understanding of why it didn't work. And you still don't have an understanding of, is this a channel that's viable for you? And you make big bets across things. And I think that's where it's painful to see, is they just make a wild big bet on something without any real time up front to make sure it's successful.
Speaking of making decisions, especially for early stage companies, I know that you talked about attribution, sexy topic. Let's dig into that, because you mentioned that it's not super important to measure everything. You first need to get some basics in place. So what would you say are those basics to get good first?
Yeah, I think looking at first touch, last touch, and then as you run campaigns inside of HubSpot or wherever you're running them, making sure you're adding all those campaigns and tracking at a campaign level what you're doing. I think everyone tries to overcomplicate it, where they say, okay, they engaged with this social post and then they heard about us through this. And so let's collect it through a combination of first touch, last touch, and self-reported attribution. And I think a big problem is it gets over-engineered to a point you're not actually any more accurate. Like people love to say, oh, we do self-reported attribution. And I've seen self-reported attribution and I've seen the answers on the back end. and it's amazing how wrong they usually are, or where someone says something and you're like, Google is what they put in. It's, okay, they came off of an ad though. So like when they say Google, Does that mean they saw us organically first? Like, where do they actually come from? And so there's lots of like variations. And I think the other big thing is, to me, is you over engineer it, or you spend time saying, we can't launch this campaign until we do this. And it's almost used as like a crutch to go slow. And I think early on, let's get generally close enough, and then let's start going. Because I think one of the big things is, like, even if you spend hours and hours trying to get the model perfect and understand what's happening, where is everything moving, you're probably still going to be wrong a lot of the time. Like, this is how the world works, and that's always been the case. And so I'm not a big believer of spending tons of time over engineering what you're trying to report on.
Yeah. You mentioned getting close enough. How do you know when you're close enough? Because I find it happens to me as well whenever I'm deep into research. There's always, I don't know, 10 more customer interviews that I can watch, sales demo calls, recordings that I can listen to, or stuff that I can do. But at some point, I have to call it a day, make a decision. So how do you know that you're close enough with knowing reasons?
I think there's things that I don't care about where I just agree. Can we all just agree and have some faith in the fact that, like, brand activities like posting on social is good and helps drive conversions? Yes, we can all agree that's the case. I don't need then to try to figure out, how do I track it? How many people heard me on this podcast? How many people did this? It's like, what's the high level metrics? And we can just agree, like, these are good activities we should be doing as a company. And you don't need any more than common sense to think about the way you're buying as an end user. If you just put yourself in that solution, anything with the last software you bought, how did you decide what you were going to buy? You probably said, okay, I know 2 of the people right off the bat that I would consider. And then I pinged 3 other people in Slack that I know, and that's how I got my short list. Then I checked out the reviews on G2, and then I inbounded, or whatever you did. I think some of that stuff is, yes, reviews and review sites are important. They play an impact in rolling. Building your brand on social definitely matters. Building your brand, period, definitely matters. So what is close enough to me is, okay, where are the conversion points? Where are they actually coming through? Are they in that opportunity stage, engaging with other pieces of content? Are they doing anything? How many people are actually, like, navigating through the site, and where are they coming from, and all that sort of stuff? I think there's a lot of stuff that's just out of the box for most of these platforms, recommendation tools and stuff you can just get, which I think gets you a pretty good insight into the full funnel. And the other stuff is just, again, just leap of faith. And it's not a big leap of faith to say these are good things we should be doing as a company. And we probably don't need to over engineer it more than that. Because I think the other big thing, and I was asked, what are you doing with that data? Because if that data is not anything you're actioning or changing behavior, then do we really care about it? If you are able to see that social's working, great, you're probably just going to keep doing it. If it's not working, you're going to say, it should be working, so let's just keep doing more of it and try to make it better. And the end result's the same, which is you want to be on social and you want to be doing these things.
Awesome. I have a question about research specifically. When it comes to the companies that you've worked at, have you ever had a tough time getting buy-in for doing research, marketing research? And how would you suggest someone gets that buy-in if they're challenged?
Yeah, I've never had a lot of difficulty in terms of getting research approved. I think a big piece of it is you have to explain the why. What is this informing? Because I think that's where you're going to get the biggest questions. If it's like, hey, we want to understand this because right now, what's the problem you're trying to solve? And if the problem is, like, none of our pages are converting, or our conversion rate's way lower, or, hey, our sales close rates when we're getting into opportunities is way off. So we want to understand some research around, like, why are people actually buying? What's informing their decisions? What are their other considerations? And I think, like, understanding how you're going to use, explaining how you're going to use that data and what's the translatable outcome to it, I think is probably the easiest way to get buy-ins from your CEO or whoever it might be. Is like, here's where we're lagging now and suffering, and here's where we're going to try to address those problems using this research. And I think there's lots of low-cost ways you can go about doing research. So I think part of it is you shouldn't just be starting with, we want to bring in some consulting company to help us with this. Have you done any of the initial work have you listened to sales prospecting calls and any of the demos? Have you done that work? Have you talked to actually customers? There's so much research stuff you could be doing that doesn't cost anything. It's just your time. And I think, like, that to me is like, you should be doing that stuff first before you ever really need any sort of funds to do anything.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah, at some point, sometimes you have to take the initiative and maybe get started on research on your own without maybe even anyone even knowing that, and then show
Yep.
them the results that you've gotten upfront.
Yep. And that's a great use of AI
Awesome.
tools there for marketing is can you
Yeah,
get
sure.
transcripts out of these calls and say, hey, here's 50 transcripts. Can you summarize for me the most common objections, questions you're getting? And if you can get a good framework for your research of how you want to do it, that's a great use for AI to accelerate that sort of process.
Yeah, sure. Speaking of data, how do you balance collecting data and creativity?
I used to be a big believer in just pure demand gen, growth hacks, tactics, all that sort of stuff, and cared less about creativity to a certain
Uh,
extent. So it was like if we get good tactics and these kinds of things, and then got around people who are just good creatively, and you're like, oh wow, this is like a game changer. And I think it's also changed a lot because it's so crowded now. In most spaces, you're not like the one company doing something unique. And so to me, I think creativity matters more and more than it ever has. And so when I think about it, I think the data informs campaigns and what we're running. And a lot of that I think is aligning to like the metrics of the business. So what I mean by that is, okay, our average customer spends 50 grand with us. We convert one out of every 10 leads into a customer. We're willing to spend $1,000 or $2,000 to get a booked call. And so, okay, to me, that's just here's the data we need. Can we get below that? Are we like red or green on that? And so I think it informs like all the other metrics lead up to that. Say, okay, are people clicking on the ad? And that'll help inform like where are you seeing the drop off? So people are seeing the ad, they're clicking on it, they're not converting on the landing page. Okay, what do we need to do on the landing page to make it better? And then I think that helps you identify where you focus your efforts. But to me, the creativity piece is really, I think, one of the big differentiators, because if you can do that really well and take different approaches to how you're doing things and different types of campaigns. And I think people often overestimate how hard it is to do something creative because it's actually not that hard if you're making sure you're allotting the time and giving space for the team to try and experiment. It's actually a huge opportunity. So the creativity piece to me is like one of the when I think about companies that want to scale and want to move fast, it's like, what are you doing creatively to actually stand out? Because if you're Help Scout and you're doing paid ads, okay, cool. You have to be better than 299 other companies in the space to actually win at paid ads. If you're just going like straight traditional approach, or you think, how do we do ads a little bit differently? How do we take whether it's your creative, whether it's your copy, whether it's the offer you're putting out there, but what are you doing that's actually unique and differentiating yourself from all those other companies?
yeah. If you had to hire someone in your marketing team, would you hire someone who's more creative or someone who's better at data? And why?
That's good. Which one of my kids I like the best? I think it's both, right? You need both is the reality. I think a lot of times people get hung up on this brand versus demand gen was like the old debate, or demand capture versus lead demand generation and all these kinds of things. And the reality is you actually need both. If you're asking me like which one's easier to coach up, like I would hire based
Yeah.
off of where I see the biggest gap on my team. So if it was just like me and one other person, I'm pretty good at the data stuff. I'd rather have more help on the creativity side of things, right? Because it's easier for me to coach someone on data and like, here's how we want to look at it, and have someone who's creative and can collaborate with on campaigns. So that's where I
Yeah.
would go with the hire. But that's not like a knock on like data.
Yeah, it makes sense. And speaking of hiring, you mentioned that for you, it's one of the biggest unlock for your career marketing. What
Yep.
are your top tips on hiring?
Yeah. I would say like the biggest things outside of just like normal behavior type of things, right? I think one of the big things is I'm going to be working with these people. I want to have people on the team that I actually enjoy to be around. And so that's one thing is I want to actually like the people I work with. And yeah. And so I think like hiring people that fit that is great. I think the other thing for me is I ask a lot of questions around data in the interviews because to me, I think if I'm hiring you to come in and do the job, I want you to really own it. Right. And I think a lot of times it's easy to just be a piece of kind of a machine. And it's hard to hire marketers because marketers are really good at using all the buzzwords, all the acronyms, all the things.
Mm.
But I really want to And it goes back to the curiosity thing, because I think really good marketers are really curious and they always want to know, okay, I might just be the copywriter on the team, but I want to know how these campaigns are converting. So I don't ask a lot of questions around their copywriting style. I can go look and see of things they've done and all that sort of stuff. But I want to know, do they actually know what the impact of what they're doing is? And so a lot of times I ask them to break down campaigns for me from like, okay, do you know how this page converted for you? Like how many leads did you generate from that? How many of those actually converted into sales? What did that actually look like from a campaign perspective? And what I find is like the best marketers, regardless of the role, know their funnel, whatever their funnel is. It could be that they're a content writer and their main North Star metric is like driving newsletter subscribers and growing that base for the company. They know their funnel. They said, okay, we know these are our main channels where we drive subscribers from. Here's how they convert. Once they convert, here's how they're engaging with the company. And like generally of our subscribers every month, 2% actually become leads for the sales team, whatever it might be. I find the best marketers know kind of their metrics inside and out. And that's like step one. And so a lot of times I ask questions that are like different data points along the way. So, okay, how many subscribers, what's your North Star metric? How many subscribers are you supposed to get? And then at some point in the interview, whether it's the first call or the second call, I actually try to have them piece it together for me and say, okay, you mentioned you're responsible for newsletter subscribers and you're supposed to generate 1,000 every month and your budget's $2,000. Like, how are you getting the subscribers? What are the channels? And break down the funnel for me. And a lot of times I think you can quickly find out who's actually like really in the weeds of things versus who's not. And that's one of the things I use a lot. And then the other one is I love asking questions of to touch on the creativity standpoint is, okay, if you had no restrictions and you could run any campaign you wanted, or your CEO doubled your goal but they gave you $1 million to go hit it, what are the things you would do? What are the fun campaigns? Where would you make those bets? And what I'm asking for is like, who's thinking bigger? Who has lots of ideas around the things they would do? Because if they're not doing that at their current company, and they're not owning the metrics and owning the numbers, I have a hard time believing they're suddenly going to come to my company and change the way they are and suddenly be like, oh, I'm going to really own this now and do these sorts of things. Because I think they're just like if I asked you, hey, if you had $1 million tomorrow in your marketing budget, what bets would you make? Yeah. You could probably sit here for an hour giving me ideas of, oh yeah, we always want to try this, or I'll try this campaign, I would do this. And really, I think that's what I'm looking for from people.
Yeah. And when it comes to hiring someone, maybe at the beginning of their journey, maybe an apprentice or someone, what do you look for in those kinds of people?
Yeah, I think people who seem like they're hardworking and they ask a lot of questions. I think that's the biggest thing is, are they curious about how it works? Does it feel like, because I think one of the big things, if you're hiring someone who's super early in their career, there's not a lot to go off of, so it's hard to ask some of the questions you traditionally ask. So that I'm trying to just get more of a read on the personality. And I think the two indicators of, does this person seem like they would be a good fit, is did they do any homework before they hop on this call? I think you've mentioned on this call, I saw Eddie posted about you on this, and I noticed you did this. And usually what I find is people who are really good come to the calls equipped with some level of research. They've either checked out the website, they've looked at blog posts, they've researched me individually. So I've heard you on this podcast. And so those people I think are doing a great job. And that's a really good signal that this person is like doing the homework and not just showing up to an interview. And then I think, do they ask lots of good questions at the end? Because I think as much of you can ask questions, if they don't have a lot of experience, it's more of what kind of questions are they asking? That's the true tell to me. What are they looking for? And does that align?
Yeah. Yeah. And a bit of more of a self-serving question. What about when it comes to hiring agencies or freelancers?
Yeah. So now that I'm running an agency, I'm on the other side of it. And so
introspective.
I would say, yeah, I think the biggest thing I look for in an agency is, are they recommended from someone I know? And so agencies, very rarely would ever just hire an agency that's just, I've never worked with, or I don't know someone who's worked with them before. Because I think a lot of the things with agencies, like agencies that have a bad reputation for swindling people and not delivering, overpromising and doing all these kinds of things. And there's tons of bad kind of agencies out there. And I think a lot of companies and founders and CMOs have felt that pain before. Of like, we hired this agency, they didn't deliver on anything they were supposed to. They were a nightmare to work with, or we got handed off to someone super junior. And so a lot of what I would, when I was hiring agencies, lean into was like, okay, I would ping people in my network all the time. Hey, who are you using for paid? Who are you using for this? Who are you using for that? And I would really only go with recommended agencies, of companies and people I trusted. So I think that was the biggest criteria. Now that I'm an agency, I lean a lot more into the social
Yeah.
proof of here's who we're working with. And most of my business actually comes from word of mouth referrals. I would say 75, 80% of it is all through that.
Yeah, same. So no cold emails, no cold pitching, no LinkedIn pitch slaps.
Well, none of that works for me as a buyer, but also doesn't, it's none of the tactics I'm using. My marketing strategy is I go on podcasts and I write on LinkedIn. And again, back to like leap of faith. Like I've
Yeah.
had people who've come inbound and said, oh, I heard you on a podcast 2 years ago. And I know you started an agency now, so I'm reaching out. So I think like you on that sort of stuff, you just have to realize how people buy it, especially working with agencies is a little bit different. It's about trust.
Yeah. Cool. When it comes to your agency Growth Union, your value prop is a brand new way to do growth this year. What do you mean by that? What's broken with growth?
So a lot of times I think with agencies on the growth side and like in marketing is they're either super like point solution. So it's a backlink agency, it's a content agency, it's a paid agency. And really the way we're a little bit different in growth unit is we are a bunch of growth marketers who've been in-house at companies. And so I think one of the big things is growth isn't usually not a one channel sport. And so we work with lots of earlier stage startups where the reality is you don't know what channel you're trying to scale. You're not at a level of maturity where you're spending $200K a month on paid ads and that's a channel and you need someone to just manage it for you. You're actually trying to figure out like where should we be growing. And so the way we work is we help companies build out their growth plan. And then from there, we execute up to 3 initiatives at any given time. And so we can swap them out. We can do lots of different things, but like we'll help you try to start scaling LinkedIn ads, try to help you with automated outbound, try to help you with whatever it might be, lots of different things depending on what we think would be the growth plan for you. And I think the other big differentiators is everyone on the team is someone that I've worked with before who's been in-house in the seat as a growth marketer, right? They've been responsible for the number because I think one of the other big gaps is you sign up with an agency, you're one of 100 clients they have, you get handed off to a junior account manager with 2 years of experience. And that's the person making decisions on your business and where you're going. And that's not like a knock on that person, but I think like a lot of times it's just not aligned. They don't have the expertise. They've never actually had to try to do it for a company and they're managing lots of different things. I think like the way we're approaching it is a little bit different.
Yeah, and I guess the way you talk about what you do, your messaging is going to be super on point because you were in your client's shoes before. You know exactly how they think and how they speak.
Yep. Yeah, exactly. When we launched with the messaging that was like most marketing agencies suck. That was like the headline. And everyone hated it. Everyone who hated it was a marketing agency. So I got tons of like DMs being like, this is a super negative way to approach this and da, 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 da. But the reality is I'm not marketing to those people. And back to where our conversation started is I need to launch messaging that stands out. If I'm launching with saying like, we can help you grow, everyone says that, right? As an agency. So how is that unique? And so I think the uniqueness of you get to work with a hand-selected team and we're approaching growth a little more holistically is the unique differentiator. And I think the way most marketing agencies do suck. And that's just my experience. And what I found is that resonates a lot with founders. It resonates a lot with CMOs because when I get on calls, they were like, oh, I loved your messaging. That was so spot on. And I heard that probably 10 times. And I also did a lot of research before. I talked to probably about 40 different founders and pitched them on the agency idea. And these are people I knew and stuff like that. And that was like literally almost a direct quote from several of them where it's, yeah, most marketing agencies suck. And so it's like, well, I should just be my messaging. Like,
Yeah.
they're saying that. And yeah, so I think that was one of those things where it's the combination of all the stuff we've just been talking about, doing the research ahead of time to understand like the pain points of that buyer and then coming out with something that feels a little bit different.
Nice. Love it. The dream team of growth.
Yes.
Awesome. Last question that I typically ask is what's your biggest challenge right now? And if you were to advise someone on how to solve it, what would you tell them?
What's my biggest challenge right now if I had to advise someone on how to solve it?
Yeah.
Okay. I would say like right now, my biggest challenge is operational. And so we're trying to scale up the agency. And so we're having lots of growth pains, I think, around, okay, we've gone from just starting out and, started January to
Mm.
8 to 10 clients in a short period of time and just managing the logistics of all of that. And so I think there's just a painful kind of process we're going through of, okay, how do we just get more consistent around the experience, the operational components of it, managing projects, all this sort of client communication, all the fun kind of components that go into a business.
Yeah.
I think I would say like how I would recommend someone try to solve that is like this is what I'm actively trying to do. It's just I talk to a lot of agencies and people I know and trust to say like, how are you handling this, or people who are similar experiences, to try to see what learnings can I shortcut, because I'm not the first person to go through something like this and try to figure it out. But I would say that's the biggest thing is like the operational piece. And then I think the other component of that is making sure every client we have is super happy and super engaged with us, because we talked about this, right? Word of mouth referral is like the number one thing for us as an agency. It's how we get all of our business. And so that really matters to me, is making sure like our clients feel like we're over delivering for them and we aren't just like every other agency. And so the client experience and adding kind of those touch points to make it feel like a great experience, balancing that with, okay, operationally, how do we scale it? Or that's the big challenge I'm trying to work through now.
Yeah, totally. Client experience is probably the lowest hanging fruit that anyone could leverage. Like even a solo freelancer, like if they curate it, yeah, it's a lot better. Everything's a lot better. Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Adam. It's been great to have you. And yeah, I think one big thing that I got from you was especially about learning how to communicate. Like even the example about asking people on how they solve these operational challenges. You are going out and speaking to people. So yeah, a big lesson that I got is people should learn how to communicate and externalize what they're dealing with, and in general try to connect more with people.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's my lazy way of shortcutting growth. Just ask someone. And most people are beyond helpful. That's the other thing I found, is like most people are willing to help if you ask and you're specific with the ask.
Cool. Also, thank you so much for coming on the show, Adam. It's been awesome.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for listening to the pod. I hope you enjoyed the episode. If you did, the best thing you could do to support the show and help me as a small business owner would be to leave a review. Head over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and let me know what you think. If you don't want to miss future episodes, subscribe, and if you have any feedback, questions, or suggestions for future episodes, just hit me up on LinkedIn at Christopher Silvestri or Twitter at SilvestriChris. Speak to you next time.